The flames licked higher into the night sky as Delilah O'Connor fought desperately against the smoke filling her lungs, her desperate screams drowned by the crackling inferno, consuming the barn around her. She had come to fetch a forgotten book from her father's workshop in the loft when a knocked-over lantern had erupted into an unforgiving blaze, trapping her behind a wall of fire that grew more menacing by the second. It was 1882 in Willow Creek, Oklahoma Territory, and the drought-stricken summer had turned everything to kindling. Delilah had moved west with her father following her mother's passing 3 years prior. At 22, she managed the household while her father, a skilled carpenter, built a modest reputation in their new community. The barn served as both storage and workshop, with a small loft where her father kept his precious books and designs. As the flames climbed higher, Delilah pressed herself against the farthest wall, clutching the leather-bound journal to her chest. The heat was becoming unbearable, her skin burning even from a distance. Her lungs burned with each breath as the smoke thickened around her. "Help!" She called out, her voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. The windows were too small to squeeze through, and the ladder to the loft had already been consumed by flames. "Please, someone help me!" Outside, the commotion had drawn a crowd. Neighbors formed a bucket brigade from the well, but it was clear their efforts would be futile against the intensity of the blaze. Among them was Jackson Fletcher, a young rancher who had arrived in Willow Creek just 6 months earlier. At 25, he'd already earned respect for his hard work and fair dealings, though few knew much about the quiet man's past. "The O'Connor girl is still in there," someone shouted. "In the loft." Jackson's eyes shot to the barn's upper window, where a faint silhouette could be seen through the smoke. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his coat and dashed toward the burning structure. "Fletcher, don't be a fool," the blacksmith called after him. "That thing's about to collapse." But Jackson was already charging toward the inferno, tying his bandana around his face as he ran. He circled the barn quickly, looking for any entry point less consumed by flames. The main doors were an impenetrable wall of fire, but the smaller side entrance was partially clear, though belching smoke. Ducking low, Jackson barreled through the doorway, immediately hit by a wave of heat so intense it felt like walking into a furnace. The smoke stung his eyes despite the bandana, but he could hear coughing from above. "Hello," he called up. "Miss O'Connor." "Here," came the weak reply. "I'm trapped in the loft." Jackson assessed the situation rapidly. The main ladder was gone and flames were spreading across the wooden floor. Grabbing a nearby work table, he dragged it beneath the loft opening, ignoring the splinters digging into his palms. He climbed atop it, reaching toward the loft floor above. "Can you see me?" he shouted. "Crawl toward my voice." Delilah moved painfully forward on hands and knees, the journal still clutched in one hand. Through the thick smoke, she saw an outstretched arm. With a final surge of energy, she pushed herself toward it. "Take my hand," Jackson commanded, stretching as far as he could. Their fingertips touched, then connected. Jackson's strong grip closed around her wrist just as a burning beam crashed down inches from where she had been. With one powerful pull, he helped her down from the loft onto the table. "Hold on to me," he instructed, wrapping an arm around her waist. A thunderous crack overhead warned of imminent collapse. Jackson swept Delilah into his arms and leaped from the table just as a section of the roof caved in behind them. Staying low, he ran toward the door, shielding her body with his own as burning debris rained down around them. They burst into the night air as the barn's structure gave a final groan and collapsed inward in a shower of sparks. Jackson carried Delilah well beyond the reach of the heat before gently setting her down on the grass. Her face was streaked with soot, her blue dress singed and torn, but she was alive. "Breathe," he told her, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "Just breathe." Delilah coughed violently, gulping in the cool night air. As her vision cleared, she found herself looking into the concerned face of a man she had seen around town but never properly met. His green eyes were intense, even in the darkness, his face smudged with ash beneath his pushed-down bandana. "You saved my life," she whispered, her voice raw. Before Jackson could respond, they were surrounded by townsfolk. Someone draped a blanket over Delilah's shoulders while others clapped Jackson on the back in congratulation. Her father, Thomas O'Connor, pushed through the crowd and dropped to his knees beside her. "Delilah. My God, I thought I'd lost you too." He embraced her tightly, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his weathered face. Then he turned to Jackson, grasping his hand firmly. "I can never repay what you've done, son." Jackson nodded uncomfortably at the attention. "Anyone would have done the same, sir." "Not anyone," Thomas insisted. "Not everyone would risk their life for a stranger." As the crowd dispersed and neighbors worked to ensure no embers spread to nearby structures, Delilah found herself unable to look away from her rescuer. There was something in his demeanor, a quiet strength tempered with gentleness, that held her attention. "You should see a doctor," Jackson said, noticing her staring. "Smoke can damage the lungs." "I will," she promised, then looked down at the journal she still clutched. "I went back for this. My father's designs. It seems foolish now." "Not foolish," Jackson replied, "just loyal." He glanced back at the smoldering ruins of the barn. "I'm sorry about your father's workshop." Delilah followed his gaze. "We can rebuild. We couldn't replace this." She held up the journal. "Or me, I suppose." The attempted humor fell flat as she was overcome by another coughing fit. Jackson hesitated, then awkwardly patted her shoulder. "I should get you to Dr. Miller's. Your father can follow once he's made sure the fire won't spread." Before she could protest, Jackson had lifted her again, blanket and all, and was carrying her toward the doctor's house at the edge of town. Despite her embarrassment at being carried through the streets, Delilah found herself relaxing against his chest, suddenly aware of how exhausted the ordeal had left her. "I don't even know your name," she murmured. "Jackson Fletcher," he replied. "Most people call me Jack, Delilah O'Connor." "But I suppose you already knew that." "Only heard it tonight when they said you were trapped," he admitted. "I'm relatively new in town." "The man with the chestnut mare," Delilah said, remembering seeing him ride through town occasionally. "You work at the Edwards Ranch, don't you?" Jackson nodded. "For now. I'm saving to buy my own place someday." They reached Dr. Miller's house, where the elderly physician had already been alerted by a neighbor and was waiting on his porch. He quickly ushered them inside, directing Jackson to place Delilah on an examination table. "Smoke inhalation, burns?" the doctor asked efficiently, already gathering supplies. "Mostly smoke, I think," Jackson answered. "She was in the loft of the barn." Dr. Miller nodded, turning to Delilah. "Let's have a look at you, Miss O'Connor. Mr. Fletcher, you might want to wait outside." "Of course," Jackson said, backing toward the door. "I should help with the fire anyway." "Mr. Fletcher," Delilah called as he reached the door. "Thank you." He gave a small nod, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment. "Get well, Miss O'Connor." After Jackson left, Dr. Miller examined Delilah thoroughly, treating minor burns on her hands and arms and giving her a mixture to ease her throat and lungs. "You're fortunate that young man acted when he did," the doctor commented as he worked. "A few more minutes in that smoke." "I know," Delilah whispered. "I keep seeing his face appearing through the smoke, like an angel." Dr. Miller smiled knowingly. "I wouldn't call Fletcher an angel to his face. He seems the type to get embarrassed by such talk." "You know him well." "Not particularly." the doctor admitted. Keeps to himself mostly. Brought in a ranch hand with a broken arm once. Paid the man's bill himself when it was clear the fellow couldn't afford it. Left an impression. Delilah tucked this information away, finding herself increasingly curious about the man who had risked his life for her. By the time her father arrived to take her home, the image of Jackson Fletcher's green eyes peering through the smoke had become firmly fixed in her mind. Their home was a modest 2-room cabin a quarter-mile from town. The barn had stood a safe distance from the house, so their living quarters remained untouched by the fire. Still, the blackened skeleton of the barn loomed as a reminder of how close they had come to tragedy. Thomas O'Connor had aged considerably in the 3 years since his wife's death, but that night he seemed to have gained another decade. He fussed over Delilah, insisting she take his bed while he slept in a chair. "Papa, I'm fine," she assured him for the 10th time. "Doctor Miller said I just need rest." "I should never have kept that lantern in the loft," Thomas muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Careless. Your mother would have had my hide for such foolishness." Delilah reached for his hand. "It was an accident and we're all right." "I saved your journal." Thomas glanced at the leather-bound book. "I would have gladly lost every design in there rather than risk you, my girl." "I know, Papa." She squeezed his hand. "What do you know about Jackson Fletcher?" Thomas looked surprised by the change in subject. "Not much. Keeps to himself but has a reputation as a hard worker." "Why? He saved my life tonight. I should thank him properly." Her father studied her face carefully. "Yes, I suppose that would be appropriate." He paused. "He's a good man from what little I know. What he did tonight proves that." Delilah nodded, turning her gaze toward the window. Outside, the first hints of dawn were lighting the eastern sky. It seemed impossible that only hours ago she had been certain she would die in those flames. Now, she felt a strange new awareness stirring within her, a gratitude that went beyond simple thanks, and a curiosity about the man who had appeared like a vision through the smoke and carried her to safety. "Get some rest," her father said gently. "Tomorrow we'll start thinking about rebuilding." As Delilah drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled not with fire and fear, but with green eyes and strong arms carrying her through the darkness into light. The following days brought a flurry of activity to the O'Connor property. Word of the fire and Jackson's heroic rescue spread quickly, and neighbors appeared with lumber, tools, and willing hands to help rebuild the barn. In a frontier community like Willow Creek, such cooperation was not just kindness, but survival. Everyone knew their turn for misfortune might come next. Delilah threw herself into the work as much as her father would allow, cooking massive meals to feed the volunteers and offering water to the workers throughout the hot days. Each morning, she found herself scanning the faces of the arriving men, looking for Jackson Fletcher. But for 3 days following the fire, he didn't appear among the helpers. On the 4th day, as Delilah was hanging laundry behind the house, she heard the distinctive sound of hoofbeats approaching. Turning, she saw a chestnut mare trotting toward the property, Jackson Fletcher astride it. He was dressed in simple work clothes, a hammer and saw visible in his saddlebag. "Miss O'Connor," he greeted her, removing his hat as he dismounted. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Delilah replied, suddenly aware of her work dress and disheveled hair. "The men are working on the framework today. My father would welcome another pair of hands." Jackson nodded but made no move toward the construction site. "I wanted to check that you've recovered from the smoke." "Much better, thank you," she said, touched by his concern. "Doctor Miller gave me something for my throat, and the coughing has almost stopped." "Good." Jackson shifted his weight, seeming unsure what to say next. I would have come sooner to help with the rebuilding, but Mr. Edwards had me working the north pasture these past few days. You don't owe us any help, Delilah assured him. You've done more than enough already. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Pulling someone from a fire doesn't exempt me from barn raising. That's just being a neighbor. Is that what we are? Neighbors? Delilah surprised herself with her boldness. Jackson considered this, his green eyes studying her face. I'd like to think so, he finally said. Though my place is just a rented room above the livery for now. Before Delilah could respond, Thomas O'Connor's voice called out from the barn site. Fletcher, is that you? Come give us a hand with this crossbeam. I should go, Jackson said, looking relieved at the interruption. It was good to see you well, Miss O'Connor. Delilah, she corrected him. After carrying someone from a burning building, I think first names are appropriate, don't you? He nodded, the small smile returning. Delilah, then, and I'm Jack. Jack, she repeated, liking how it sounded. There will be dinner for all the workers at sundown. I hope you'll stay. With another nod, he turned and led his horse toward the barn site. Delilah watched him go, noticing the easy way he moved and how the other men greeted him with respect, despite his relative newness in the community. There was something about him that inspired confidence, a steady assurance in his actions that suggested reliability. Throughout the afternoon, Delilah found reasons to visit the construction site, bringing water or asking her father questions that could have waited. Each time her eyes sought out Jack, observing how he worked methodically and spoke little, but listened intently when others talked. By sundown, the day's work was complete, and Delilah had prepared a hearty meal of stew, cornbread, and apple pie. The men gathered around tables set up in the yard, their voices loud and cheerful after a productive day's work. Jack sat somewhat apart from the others, eating quietly and occasionally responding when addressed directly. Delilah made her way toward him, carrying a pitcher of lemonade. More, she offered, gesturing to his empty cup. Thank you, he replied, holding it out for her to fill. The food is excellent, best meal I've had in some time. High praise from a man who probably eats at the boarding house, he chuckled. Mrs. Simmons tries her best, but her stew doesn't hold a candle to yours. You're just being kind, Delilah said, though pleased by the compliment. Not my nature to say things I don't mean, Jack replied simply. There was a brief, comfortable silence between them before Delilah gathered her courage. Jack, I never properly thanked you for what you did. You did, actually, at the doctor's. 2 words while half-conscious from smoke isn't proper thanks, she insisted. You risked your life for me. Jack set down his cup, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have, no, Delilah interrupted. Not anyone would have run into that inferno. Most stood watching, and I don't blame them. It was a death trap. He looked at her then, his expression softening. I'm glad I was there then. As am I. Delilah took a deep breath. I keep thinking about how different things would be if you hadn't been. I wouldn't be here having this conversation. But you are here, Jack said firmly, as if closing the subject. And your father's barn will be better than before within a week, at the rate these men work. Delilah recognized his deflection, but decided not to press. There was something in his reluctance to accept praise that intrigued her, as if heroism embarrassed him. Will you come again tomorrow? She asked instead, if Mr. Edwards can spare me. His eyes met hers briefly. I'd like to see the project through. The next morning, Jack arrived early, his mare's hoofbeats alerting Delilah even before she saw him. He had brought his own tools again and immediately joined the men working on the roof structure. For the next 3 days, he appeared reliably each morning and worked steadily until dusk, taking his meals with the others but speaking little. On the 5th day of construction, Delilah approached him during the midday break, carrying 2 plates of food. The other men had gathered in the shade of a large oak, but Jack sat alone on a stack of lumber. "Mind some company?" she asked, offering him a plate. He accepted it with a nod. "Not at all." Delilah settled beside him, smoothing her skirts. "The barn is coming along wonderfully. Papa says it's sturdier than the original." "Your father is a skilled carpenter," Jack observed. "He has a good eye for design, he does. Those journals I saved contain years of his ideas." Delilah paused. "May I ask you something?" Jack looked wary but nodded. "Of course." "Where did you learn carpentry? You work like someone who's done it before, not just picked it up these past few days." A shadow passed over his face. "My father was a builder back east. I worked with him from the time I could hold a hammer until I was 20. What brought you west?" Jack chewed thoughtfully before answering. "A desire for open spaces, and perhaps to make my own way apart from my father's reputation." Delilah sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. "I understand that. After Mama died, Papa couldn't bear to stay in our hometown. Too many memories. We came west to start fresh, though I don't think he's found much peace yet." "And you?" Jack asked, surprising her by turning the conversation. "Have you found peace here?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm not sure. I've been so focused on keeping our home running, on being what Papa needs, that I haven't given much thought to what I want." "And what do you want?" Delilah O'Connor. His green eyes were intent on her face. She met his gaze steadily. "I want to build something meaningful. A life that matters with people I care about." She hesitated. "What about you?" "Land," Jack answered immediately. "My own piece of earth that no one can take from me. A ranch eventually, something I can pass on someday." "To children?" Delilah asked boldly. A faint smile touched his lips. "That would require a wife first, I suppose. Judging by the way Constance Miller watches you at church, that wouldn't be difficult to arrange," Delilah teased, referring to the doctor's niece who had recently moved to town. Jack's smile vanished. "I'm not looking for arrangements. If I marry, it will be for deeper reasons than convenience." Delilah nodded, oddly pleased by his response. "A love match, then? I wouldn't have taken you for a romantic Jack Fletcher." "There's a lot you don't know about me," he replied, but his tone was light again. "I'd like to learn," she said simply. Their eyes held for a moment longer than was proper, and Delilah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Something was happening between them, something tentative and new, but undeniable. The moment was broken by Thomas O'Connor calling the men back to work. Jack stood and offered Delilah his hand to help her up. His fingers were calloused but gentle as they closed around hers. "Thank you for the meal," he said, releasing her hand. "And the conversation." "Anytime," Delilah replied, watching as he returned to the construction site. The barn was completed more quickly than anyone had anticipated, a testament to the community's generosity and hard work. On the final day, as the last of the roof shingles were being nailed in place, Delilah found herself standing beside her father, surveying the nearly finished structure. "It's better than before," Thomas admitted, pride evident in his voice. "Sturdier, with more light from those additional windows." "We've been blessed with good neighbors," Delilah replied, her eyes finding Jack among the men on the roof. Thomas followed her gaze. "Fletcher's been a godsend, not just for pulling you from the fire but these past days too. Knows his way around construction better than most men twice his age." He mentioned his father was a builder. "Did he now?" Thomas looked interested. "He doesn't share much about himself with most folks." Delilah felt a small thrill at the idea that Jack had opened up to her in ways he hadn't with others. "I think he's just private, not secretive." "There's a difference, to be sure," her father agreed. Though a man with nothing to hide generally doesn't keep so much to himself. He patted her shoulder. Just be careful with your heart, Delilah. You've been watching that young man like he hung the moon ever since the fire. Embarrassed at being so transparent, Delilah flushed. He saved my life, Papa. It's natural I'd feel some gratitude. Gratitude, is it? Thomas raised an eyebrow. Well, I suppose there are worse foundations for affection. Just remember that heroics in a moment of crisis don't always translate to steadfastness in daily life. I know, Papa, Delilah assured him, though privately she believed Jack Fletcher would prove just as reliable in ordinary moments as he had in that extraordinary one. That evening, the community gathered for a celebration to mark the completion of the barn. Lanterns hung from the new rafters, their light reflecting warmly off the fresh-cut wood. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small group of musicians played lively tunes in the corner. Despite the recent tragedy, or perhaps because they had overcome it together, the mood was festive. Delilah had taken special care with her appearance, wearing her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white lace trim, and arranging her chestnut hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical braid. She moved among the guests, accepting congratulations and gratitude for her cooking, all while surreptitiously watching for Jack's arrival. When he finally appeared in the doorway, Delilah nearly dropped the plate she was holding. He had clearly made an effort as well, dressed in clean dark trousers and a pressed white shirt, his usually unruly brown hair combed neatly. He looked uncomfortable among the crowd but determinedly polite as people greeted him. Delilah made her way toward him, smiling. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come, and miss seeing the fruits of everyone's labor, Jack replied. I wouldn't. He glanced around the barn. It looks even better with the lanterns lit. Thanks to you and all the others, Delilah said. Papa says it's sturdier than before. It is, Jack confirmed. The support beams are thicker, and we added those extra crosspieces for stability. An awkward silence fell between them, different from their easy conversations during the construction. Delilah realized this was the first time they had spoken in a social setting rather than a working one. Would you like some food? She offered. There's plenty. Maybe later, Jack replied. His eyes moved to the musicians as they struck up a livelier tune. Several couples began to dance in the cleared center of the barn. Delilah watched them wistfully. She enjoyed dancing but rarely had the opportunity, especially since moving west where social gatherings were infrequent. You dance, Miss O'Connor? Jack asked suddenly. The formality of his address surprised her after days of using her first name. When given the opportunity, Mr. Fletcher, she responded in kind, a small smile playing at her lips. He hesitated, then extended his hand. Would you do me the honor? Delilah's heart leapt as she placed her hand in his. I would be delighted. Jack led her to the makeshift dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while holding her right hand with his left. As they began to move to the music, Delilah discovered that despite his usual reserve, Jack was a confident dancer. You surprise me again, she told him as he guided her smoothly through a turn. How so? He asked, his eyes never leaving hers. You dance very well for a man who seems to avoid social gatherings. A hint of a smile touched his lips. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stomp on a lady's feet. She taught you well, Delilah observed. Is she still living? Jack nodded. In Boston, with my father and younger sisters. You must miss them. Some days more than others, he admitted. But we write. My mother is a prolific correspondent. And what does she think of her son becoming a cowboy in Oklahoma Territory? Jack's smile widened slightly. She thinks I've lost my mind. My father believes I'll come to my senses and return to the family business eventually." "Will you?" Delilah asked. "No," Jack answered firmly. "There's nothing for me there anymore." The certainty in his voice sparked Delilah's curiosity again about what had driven him west, but she sensed now wasn't the time to press. Instead, she allowed herself to enjoy the moment, the music, the movement, and the warm strength of Jack's hand at her waist. They danced 3 songs together before Jack suggested they step outside for some air. The night was clear and cool, a welcome relief from the warmth of the crowded barn. They walked a short distance, stopping by the old oak tree. "Thank you for the dances," Delilah said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "The pleasure was mine," Jack replied, his voice low. He turned to face her, the moonlight illuminating his features. "Delilah, I've been meaning to ask. That is, I was wondering if—" He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. Delilah waited, her heart beating faster at his proximity and the intensity in his eyes. "Would you permit me to call on you?" he finally asked. "Properly, I mean." Joy bubbled up inside her, but Delilah managed to keep her composure. "I would like that very much, Jack." Relief washed over his face. "Good, that's good." Emboldened by his nervousness, Delilah took a step closer. "Was that so difficult to ask? More terrifying than running into a burning building," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "And yet you did both," she observed softly. His eyes searched hers in the moonlight. "Some things are worth the risk." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Delilah thought he might kiss her and found herself hoping he would. Instead, Jack took her hand and raised it gently to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "We should return before your father sends a search party," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. Delilah nodded, though part of her wished to remain in this moment, away from watchful eyes. As they walked back toward the barn, Jack kept a proper distance between them, but Delilah felt as though something fundamental had shifted. The connection that had begun in fire and smoke was growing into something deeper, something with the potential to change both their lives completely. True to his word, Jack called on Delilah the following Sunday after church. He arrived at the O'Connor home looking slightly uncomfortable in his Sunday best, but determined nonetheless. Thomas O'Connor welcomed him with a firm handshake and a keen eye, clearly evaluating the young man who had shown interest in his daughter. Over the next several weeks, Jack became a regular visitor. Sometimes he and Delilah would sit on the porch swing, talking until sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Other times, he would help Thomas with projects around the property, the 2 men working side by side in a comfortable silence that gradually gave way to conversation. Delilah learned that Jack had indeed come from a respectable Boston family of builders, that he had 3 younger sisters he adored, and that he had left the East after a disagreement with his father over the family business. He was sparing with details about the conflict, but Delilah gathered it had been significant enough to drive him across the country. In turn, Delilah shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, of her mother's illness and passing, and of the difficult journey west with her grieving father. She spoke of her dreams for the future, a home of her own someday, perhaps children, but also a desire to do something meaningful beyond domestic duties. "I've always loved books," she confessed one evening as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name. "When I was younger, I thought I might become a teacher." "Why didn't you?" Jack asked, genuinely interested. Delilah shrugged. "Life took a different turn. After Mama died, Papa needed me, and out here, opportunities for women are limited." "That doesn't mean you should abandon your dreams," Jack said. "The West is changing. Towns like Willow Creek need educated women to teach the next generation." His support warmed her. Maybe someday. What about your dreams? Still set on having your own ranch? Jack nodded, his expression turning serious. I've been saving every penny. Mr. Edwards mentioned there's a small property coming available at the end of the season, nothing grand, just 100 acres with a modest cabin, but it would be a start. That sounds wonderful, Delilah said sincerely, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the thought of Jack putting down permanent roots in Willow Creek. It does, he agreed, then hesitated. But a ranch is a lot for one person to manage. Delilah's heart quickened at the implication in his words, but Jack didn't elaborate further. Instead, he changed the subject, asking about her father's latest carpentry project. The moment passed, but the possibility he had hinted at lingered in Delilah's mind. As summer gave way to autumn, the relationship between Delilah and Jack deepened. They were often seen walking together after church, or sharing a meal at the town's small restaurant on special occasions. Though Jack remained somewhat reserved with others, with Delilah he gradually opened up, revealing a dry wit and thoughtful nature that few in town ever witnessed. "You're different with me," she observed one afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching the leaves change color on the surrounding trees. "How so?" Jack asked, tossing a pebble into the water. "You talk more, smile more." She glanced at him. "Why is that?" Jack considered her question seriously. "I've never found it easy to connect with people. Words don't always come naturally to me, but with you it's different, easier." "I'm glad," Delilah said softly. Jack reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers, a gesture that had become familiar and precious over the past weeks. "Delilah, there's something I need to tell you, about why I left Boston." She squeezed his hand encouragingly. "You can tell me anything, Jack." He took a deep breath. "My father wanted me to marry the daughter of his business partner, Charlotte Prescott. It was practically arranged from childhood, two prominent building families joining forces. When I refused, things became difficult." Delilah felt a twinge of jealousy at the mention of another woman. "Did you love her?" "No," Jack answered immediately. "She was a fine woman, but there was nothing between us. I couldn't commit my life to someone out of convenience or family obligation." "So you left everything behind rather than marry without love," Delilah summarized, a new understanding of Jack's character taking shape. He nodded. "My father said I was throwing away my future. Maybe he was right, in terms of financial security. But I couldn't live a lie even for the family business." "That took courage," Delilah said softly, "or stubbornness," Jack replied with a wry smile. "My father would say the latter. I think I would like your father even if he is wrong about you." Jack's expression softened. "He's a good man despite our differences, and my mother. You would love her. She's kind but formidable, doesn't suffer fools gladly, like her son," Delilah observed with a smile. Jack chuckled. "I suppose so." His expression grew serious again. "I've been thinking about writing to them. Letting them know I'm settled here, that I'm—" He paused. "That you're what?" Delilah prompted gently. "Happy," he finished simply, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. As autumn progressed, Jack spent more time at the Edwards ranch, working long hours that limited his visits. Delilah knew he was saving every possible dollar toward the property he hoped to purchase, and she admired his determination even as she missed his company. When they did see each other, there was a new urgency to their conversations, a sense that they were building towards something important. Jack spoke more concretely about the ranch he hoped to buy, describing improvements he would make to the cabin and how he would develop the land. Increasingly, his plans included questions about what Delilah would want in a home, what features would make life comfortable for a family. Thomas O'Connor observed the courtship with a father's mixture of happiness and concern. One evening, as he and Delilah sat by the fire after Jack had departed, he broached the subject directly. "That young man has serious intentions toward you," he stated, watching his daughter's face carefully. Delilah nodded, unable to hide her smile. "I believe he does. And your feelings?" Thomas asked, though the answer was written clearly in her expression. "I love him, Papa," she admitted, saying aloud what she had known in her heart for weeks. "He's good and honest and kind." Thomas nodded slowly. "I can see that. Still carries some shadows from his past, I think, but who among us doesn't?" he sighed. "Your mother would have liked him. She always valued substance over show." Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes at the mention of her mother. "Do you think she would approve of him? Of us?" "Without question," Thomas assured her, reaching over to pat her hand. "Just as I do. He's proven himself in more ways than one since that night at the barn." The first snow of the season arrived in early December, transforming Willow Creek into a picturesque winter landscape. Jack appeared at the O'Connor home on a Sunday afternoon, having borrowed a sleigh from Mr. Edwards. His face was alight with boyish excitement as he helped Delilah into the conveyance, tucking warm blankets around her before climbing in beside her. They glided through the snow-covered countryside, the horses' bells creating a merry soundtrack to their journey. Jack seemed unusually nervous, checking his pocket repeatedly and responding distractedly to Delilah's observations about the winter scenery. "Is everything all right?" she finally asked as they approached a bend in the creek where the water remained unfrozen, creating a striking contrast with the snow-covered banks. "Yes," Jack answered quickly, then sighed. "No, I mean," he pulled the sleigh to a stop and turned to face her. "Delilah, I had a plan for today. A speech prepared. But now I can't remember a word of it." Confusion gave way to understanding as Jack reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Delilah's heart began to race as he opened it to reveal a modest but beautiful ring with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I'm not eloquent like some men," Jack said, his voice steadier now, "but I know what's in my heart. From the moment I carried you from that barn, something changed in me. You changed me, made me believe in possibilities I'd given up on." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Delilah O'Connor. I want to build a life with you, a home, a family, a future. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks as joy overwhelmed her. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Jack, I will marry you." Relief and happiness transformed his face as he carefully slipped the ring onto her finger. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "I wrote to my mother after we talked by the creek, told her about you, about us. She sent this with her blessing." "It's beautiful," Delilah said, examining the delicate ring that now symbolized their commitment. "And it means even more knowing it comes with your family's approval." "Not that I needed it," Jack clarified. "I would have asked you regardless, but I'm glad to have it." Delilah leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a sweet, tender kiss there first. When they parted, both were flushed from more than just the cold. "I love you, Jackson Fletcher," Delilah whispered against his lips. He smiled, wrapping his arms around her. "And I love you, soon to be Delilah Fletcher." They returned to the O'Connor home to share their news with Thomas, who welcomed Jack with a hearty embrace and misty eyes. That evening, the three of them sat by the fire, discussing plans for the future with the easy comfort of a family already formed in all but name. Jack had secured the property he'd been saving for, having made a down payment the previous week in anticipation of Delilah's answer. The wedding was set for the spring, giving them time to prepare the cabin for their life together. As winter settled fully over Willow Creek, Jack divided his time between work at the Edwards Ranch and improvements to his new property. Delilah began assembling items for their home linens, kitchenware, and the beginnings of a hope chest filled with handmade quilts and embroidered cloths. In the evenings, she often worked on these projects while Jack and her father discussed plans for expanding the cabin, once the weather improved. The town's annual Christmas gathering provided an opportunity to announce their engagement formally. The small church was decorated with evergreen boughs and candles, creating a warm, festive atmosphere despite the bitter cold outside. After the service, as the congregation shared refreshments in the adjoining meeting room, Reverend Wilson called for attention. "I understand we have some happy news to celebrate tonight," he announced, smiling at Jack and Delilah. "Would you like to share it with everyone?" Jack, normally uncomfortable as the center of attention, stood straight and proud as he took Delilah's hand. "Miss Delilah O'Connor has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal of marriage," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "We'll be wed this coming April." A chorus of congratulations erupted, with many rushing forward to embrace Delilah and shake Jack's hand. The town had watched their courtship unfold and had collectively approved, especially given the dramatic circumstances of their first meeting. The young couple, who had been brought together by fire, would now build a life from those ashes. It was a story that resonated deeply with the frontier community where hardship and hope were constant companions. As winter slowly gave way to spring, preparations for both the wedding and their future home accelerated. Jack, with help from Thomas and other friends, added 2 rooms to the cabin, creating a comfortable space for the young couple to begin their life together. Delilah, meanwhile, divided her time between trousseau preparations and learning from the town's more experienced wives about managing a ranch household. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with wildflowers beginning to dot the prairie around Willow Creek. The small church was filled beyond capacity, as it seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion. Jack stood at the altar looking handsome but nervous in his new suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the important day. When Delilah appeared at the church door on her father's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation. Her dress, though simple by Eastern standards, was exquisite ivory silk ordered specially from Kansas City, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an elegant style, adorned with small white flowers, and her face glowed with happiness. Jack's expression as she walked toward him contained everything Delilah had ever hoped to see: love, admiration, and a promise of devotion that needed no words. As Thomas placed her hand in Jack's, both men had tears in their eyes, though Jack would later deny his vigorously. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Wilson speaking eloquently about the foundations of a strong marriage: trust, respect, and abiding love. When Jack and Delilah exchanged vows, their voices rang clear and certain, having already demonstrated their commitment to one another long before this formal declaration. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Wilson declared joyfully. "Mr. Fletcher, you may kiss your bride." Jack took Delilah's face gently between his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that belied his strength, sealing their union before God and the community that had brought them together. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration that followed at the town hall lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and a feast contributed to by nearly every household in Willow Creek. Jack, typically reserved at such gatherings, seemed transformed by happiness, dancing not only with his bride but with several of the older women who had taken a maternal interest in the young man with no family nearby. As dusk fell, The newlyweds slipped away to begin their journey to their new home. Jack had prepared a surprise for Delilah, the sleigh they had ridden in when he proposed, now decorated with ribbons and flowers for their wedding day. Though the snow had long since melted, the wheeled configuration of the vehicle made it perfect for the short journey to their ranch. "Mrs. Fletcher," Jack said as he helped her into the sleigh, testing the name with evident satisfaction. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," Delilah replied, her heart full to bursting with happiness. "Absolutely perfect." The first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges as Jack and Delilah established their life together on the small ranch. Jack worked tirelessly to make the land productive, raising cattle and growing crops with a determination that impressed even the most experienced ranchers in the area. Delilah managed their home with efficiency and warmth, creating a haven that welcomed friends and neighbors with generous hospitality. Thomas O'Connor became a frequent visitor, bringing tools and expertise for ongoing improvements to the ranch. Though he maintained his own home in town, where his carpentry business continued to thrive, he often spent weekends with the young couple, clearly delighting in their happiness. By their first anniversary, Delilah had news that brought even greater joy to their small family. She was expecting a child. Jack's reaction to the announcement was everything she could have hoped for, his usual reserve dissolving into unconstrained happiness as he lifted her off her feet in a jubilant embrace. "A baby," he repeated in wonder, placing a hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Due in the autumn," Delilah confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "Around harvest time." Jack's green eyes, always expressive to those who knew him well, shone with emotion. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe that fire led me to you." "It wasn't just the fire," Delilah corrected him gently. "It was your courage, your willingness to risk everything for someone you didn't even know. That's who you are, Jack, the man who runs into burning buildings when everyone else is running out." He shook his head, a familiar modesty clouding his expression. "Anyone would have—" "Stop," Delilah interrupted with a smile. "After all this time, you still can't accept that what you did was extraordinary. But that's one of the reasons I love you so much. You do remarkable things and consider them ordinary duty." Jack pulled her close, resting his chin atop her head. "I did get something remarkable in return," he murmured. "A life I never dared dream of." As Delilah's pregnancy progressed, the ranch flourished under Jack's careful management. A particularly good season with the cattle allowed them to purchase additional acreage adjacent to their property, expanding the operation significantly. Jack hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, ensuring he could be available to Delilah as her time approached. Thomas temporarily moved in with them during the final weeks of Delilah's pregnancy, his carpentry business able to spare him for a short period. He spent the time crafting a beautiful cradle from oak, working in the evenings while Jack and Delilah sat nearby, discussing names and dreams for their child's future. On a crisp October morning, with golden leaves swirling in the autumn breeze, Delilah went into labor. Jack sent one of the ranch hands galloping to town for Dr. Miller, while he and Thomas prepared the bedroom according to instructions they'd received weeks earlier. For hours, Delilah labored bravely, squeezing Jack's hand through contractions that grew increasingly intense. Dr. Miller arrived midway through, bringing welcome expertise and calm reassurance to the anxious father-to-be. "She's strong, Fletcher," the doctor assured Jack when he was briefly banished from the room. "Doing everything right. Try not to wear a hole in the floor with your pacing." Jack managed a tense smile. "Easier said than done, Doc." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, A new cry joined the sounds of the day, the lusty wail of a healthy baby entering the world. Jack, allowed back into the room at Delilah's insistence, stood transfixed as Dr. Miller placed their son in his exhausted wife's arms. "A boy," the doctor announced unnecessarily, beaming at the new parents. "A fine, strong boy." Jack moved to Delilah's side, sinking onto the edge of the bed to gaze in wonder at the tiny, red-faced infant. With trembling fingers, he touched his son's cheek, marveling at the softness of the skin and the perfect miniature features. "He's beautiful," he whispered, tears threatening. "Just like his mother." Delilah smiled tiredly up at him. "I was thinking we could name him Thomas, after Papa." "Thomas Jackson Fletcher." Jack nodded, too overwhelmed for words. He bent to kiss Delilah's forehead, then his son's, a gesture of tenderness that conveyed what he couldn't express aloud. When Thomas was invited in to meet his namesake, the older man made no attempt to hide his tears. He cradled his grandson with practiced ease, murmuring promises and blessings to the newborn while Jack and Delilah watched with contented smiles. Life settled into a new rhythm with young Thomas's arrival. The baby thrived under his parents' devoted care, growing stronger each day. Jack proved to be a natural father, as comfortable cradling his son as he was handling ranch business. He often brought Thomas with him for the less strenuous ranch tasks, carrying the baby in a sling across his chest as he checked fences or inspected cattle. "You're turning our son into a rancher before he can even walk," Delilah observed one evening as Jack returned from such an excursion, Thomas sleeping peacefully against his father's chest. "Just showing him his inheritance," Jack replied with a smile, carefully transferring the sleeping infant to his cradle. Although he seemed more interested in the clouds today than the cattle. "Perhaps we're raising a dreamer," Delilah suggested, wrapping her arms around her husband's waist and leaning against his solid strength. Jack's arms encircled her automatically. "Nothing wrong with that. Dreams brought me west. Dreams led me to you." As young Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Fletcher Ranch continued to prosper. Jack's careful management and willingness to adopt new methods resulted in consistently good returns, allowing for further improvements to both the land and their home. Delilah, meanwhile, had begun teaching reading to several neighboring children once a week, fulfilling her old dream in a modest but meaningful way. On Thomas's second birthday, as family and neighbors gathered to celebrate, Jack pulled Delilah aside during a quiet moment. "I have something to show you," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Can you slip away for a few minutes?" Curious, Delilah followed him around the back of their home where he had covered something large with a tarp. With a flourish, Jack pulled the covering away to reveal a wooden sign, beautifully carved and painted. "Fletcher Family Ranch, established 1882. Do you like it?" Jack asked, watching her face anxiously. "Your father helped with the carving, but I did the painting myself." Delilah traced the letters with her fingertips, emotion welling up inside her. "It's perfect, Jack. Absolutely perfect." "I thought we could mount it at the entrance to the property," he explained. "Make it official, you know. This land, this life we've built, it's something I want to last for generations." Delilah nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind the gesture. For Jack, whose journey west had been motivated partly by a desire to escape his family's expectations, creating this legacy, one of his own making, represented healing and hope for the future. "Thomas will be proud to carry it on someday," she said softly. "And perhaps his brothers or sisters too." Jack's eyebrows rose. "Is that a hint, Mrs. Fletcher?" Delilah smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach in a gesture that had become familiar. "Not a hint, a certainty. Dr. Miller confirms we'll welcome another little Fletcher in the winter." Joy swept across Jack's face as he pulled her into an embrace. "Another baby," he murmured against her hair. "Our family grows stronger." "As does our love," Delilah replied, reaching up to touch his cheek. Who would have thought that night, with the barn in flames and me certain I would die, that we were actually at the beginning of something so beautiful? Jack's expression grew serious. "I knew something important had happened the moment I found you in that smoke. I just didn't understand what yet." He kissed her gently. "I may have carried you from that fire, Delilah, but you rescued me just as surely, from loneliness, from doubt. You gave me a home in every sense of the word." As they returned to the birthday celebration, hand in hand, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From terror and destruction had come love and creation, a pattern as old as humanity itself. The barn that had burned that night was long replaced. The trauma of the fire faded to memory, but the connection forged in those flames had only strengthened with time. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Jack's mother, arrived during a December blizzard that nearly prevented Dr. Miller from reaching them. Jack, who had faced the prospect of delivering his own child with remarkable composure, greeted the doctor with such relief that the older man chuckled. Facing down a burning building was less frightening, Fletcher? He teased as he hung up his snow-covered coat. "Some things a man shouldn't have to do alone," Jack replied with feeling, ushering the doctor toward the bedroom where Delilah waited. Elizabeth proved to be as strong and healthy as her brother, though with a decidedly different temperament. Where Thomas was thoughtful and observant, Elizabeth was curious and bold from her earliest days. Jack often joked that she had inherited all of Delilah's courage and his stubbornness, a combination sure to bring both pride and challenges as she grew. The years passed in a blend of ordinary days and milestone moments. The Fletcher Ranch expanded gradually, becoming one of the more prosperous operations in the area. Jack's innovative approaches to cattle breeding and land management earned him respect among fellow ranchers, many of whom sought his advice despite his relative youth. Delilah's informal teaching evolved into a more structured arrangement when Willow Creek finally established a proper school. Though she declined a full-time position, preferring to focus on her family and the ranch, she served as a substitute teacher when needed and maintained a small library in their home that became a resource for neighbors near and far. Thomas O'Connor remained a beloved presence in their lives until his passing peacefully in his sleep at age 70. Having lived to see the birth of 4 grandchildren, Thomas and Elizabeth had been joined by Samuel and little Catherine, completing the Fletcher family. His legacy lived on not only in his namesake grandson, who showed a natural aptitude for carpentry, but in the solid foundation he had helped build for the family both literally and figuratively. On a warm summer evening in 1900, Jack and Delilah sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. Their children were scattered about the property. Thomas, now 17, checking the livestock; Elizabeth, 15, practicing her riding in the corral; Samuel, 11, and Catherine, 8, playing an elaborate game of their own invention near the old oak tree. 18 years, Jack remarked, reaching for Delilah's hand. "Hard to believe it's been that long since I carried you from that barn." Delilah smiled, the fine lines around her eyes crinkling. At 40, she remained as beautiful to Jack as she had been at 22, perhaps more so for the life they had shared. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it seems like a story that happened to someone else. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if there had been no fire that night?" Jack asked. "If we had simply met at church or in town like ordinary people?" Delilah considered this. I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway. That some things are meant to be, regardless of circumstance. A romantic notion, Jack teased gently, though his eyes were warm. Says the man who refused an arranged marriage and traveled across the country to find true love, Delilah countered with a smile. Jack laughed, the sound mingling with the evening birdsong. I didn't know I was looking for love when I came west. I was running from expectations, from a future planned by others. And instead, you ran into a burning building and found a different future altogether, Delilah mused. Providence works in mysterious ways. They fell silent, watching as their children's activities wound down with the fading light. Soon, they would all gather inside for supper, filling the house with chatter and laughter. Arguments and reconciliations, the beautiful chaos of family life that Jack and Delilah had built together from the ashes of that long-ago fire. "I'd do it all again," Jack said suddenly, his voice low and fervent. "Every moment from that night to this one, even the hard times." Delilah squeezed his hand, understanding. They had weathered their share of difficulties over the years: crop failures, illnesses, the loss of Thomas, and the everyday challenges of marriage and parenthood. But through it all, the bond formed between them had only strengthened, tempered like steel in fire. "As would I," she replied softly. Every single moment. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jack drew Delilah closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders in a gesture as familiar and necessary as breathing. Together, they watched their world settle into evening, secure in the knowledge that from a single act of courage had grown a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, a fire of a different kind, warming generations to come. The Fletcher Ranch remained a cornerstone of the community for decades, weathering the changing fortunes of the West with the same resilience that had characterized its founders. Jack and Delilah lived to see their grandchildren run through the same fields where their children had played, to witness the territory of Oklahoma become a state, and to celebrate 50 years of marriage surrounded by a family that had expanded beyond their wildest dreams. When visitors asked about the unusual painting that hung prominently in their living room, a striking image of a barn engulfed in flames with two silhouettes emerging from the smoke, Jack would smile and say simply, "That's where our story began." And Delilah would squeeze his hand, both of them remembering the night when death had seemed certain but life, against all odds, had just been beginning.